Hi, everyone. I know you're all in listen only mode, so I'm not expecting to hear back from you. But today we're going to talk about the new expense report workspace in D365 for operations, and it's called Expense Reports Reimagined. So, for those of you that are already using expense management or familiar with expense management, um, D365 has always offered a full expense management suite that takes you from credit card entry all the way to posting in the ledger. Rather than focus on all of the idiosyncrasies between what Dynamics does offer throughout the module, today we're going to actually just focus and highlight on what the new features are in the latest update. Okay. So what those are is a brand new workspace, new ways to manage delegation and keep track of reports for your delegates in a much smooth manner, easy report creation, as well as some new forms to add and remove fields to the expense report and determine what is visible and what is not. We'll go over how expense policies interact with your users as they're entering reports rather than waiting to perhaps the end of entry and the stacking that occurs and determining what really needs to be done to meet your organization's policies. We'll also go into a little bit about ease of receipt visibility. And at the end, I'm going to talk about some of the new workflow configurations, and we'll talk about some options that can occur there. Okay. For those of you that haven't seen the new workspace in expense management, it's a much cleaner view of all the reports for a user where they can have open expenses, receipts, credit card transactions, any approvals outstanding, all their fingertips in one clean view. So we're going to go into the application right now because no one wants to stare at the PowerPoint all day. And take a look. Okay, I've logged into D365 for operations now, and I'm going to migrate over to my expense management workspace. I've opened workspaces up, and I'm going to scroll right down to my expense management workspace. For those of you that haven't enabled the new feature set, you won't see this workspace just yet. But if you have questions on how to enable a new feature set or anything like that, we can totally address those questions at the end of today. But this new feature set, once it's installed, will provide this workspace. So what you see first at the top left when you're looking at the new workspace is you see the user's name. That would be your name. However, if you're responsible for managing other employees' expense reports, in the past, it was a bit cumbersome to get to their reports, but what you can do now is simply click this drop down and quickly navigate between employees that you manage expenses for. And I'll show you the comparison to the prior version so you can get an idea of the navigation and usability behind it. In addition, we've got these great communication numbers up here. This quickly tells the user and the employee how many open expense reports they have. So have they started something but not had a chance to finish it? Do they have receipts that they uploaded or took pictures of but simply forgot to expense? Or are they using a corporate credit card and need to perform some receipt matching? You'll see all this up at the top. Next below on this ribbon are tabs. We start with the Reports tab, and we can see all the report headers. And from there, we can dive into each report or take action, such as submitting, recalling, or copying. I'm going to start first with the copy function. Often, employees will have expense reports that they duplicate each month, month after month, and it's tedious to have to go find the expenses or copy them. It would be nice just to be able to say, these were the expenses I do every single month. I'm going to make one report, and each month I'll simply need to copy that data over. So you have some options when you do that. So you'll select the report that you'll want to copy over and press copy. And what's great about this new feature is that you can say, I want all dates set to today. I want all dates set to a specific date, so that if they're going to do the expense report for, let's say, next week or next month, they have those options. Or you just say, I want to advance the days by 7 days or 30 days, so that when the report is created, it's accurate and reflects the time period and bucket that we were talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and press copy and open. And it's going to copy the data from my previous report onto my new report. In this case, it was simply an expense for fuel. But what's helpful is you see this date got updated to today's date. And so I don't need to take the extra step to go in and update the date. Now that I've entered or copied what I need to, I can then continue to create my report. We'll come right back to this after we navigate further through the home screen. Outside of just the report, we have this receipts tab. This can be very useful. So you'll see all your outstanding receipts that you may have uploaded already or taken photos of with your mobile application. And so what you can do then is you can quickly just hover over which one you need and dive into the details of it and attach it to an existing report, a new report, or a new expense. It's very easy to complete. We'll just go and click attach to an existing report, attach to a new report, or just add more receipts here. I'm not doing those steps yet because I'm going to save these few expenses for a little bit later on in our demo here. Then the next tab is going to be our expense tab. What we'll do here is, we'll create expenses, but that we're not ready to attach to a report. So if we're on the go and on our phone and we just want to quickly capture, oh, that gas ticket, that Uber ride, we're able to quickly add these here. The next two tabs I think are going to be very useful for not only administrators, but the user in monitoring what is occurring, what they need to be reimbursed for, all those statuses. The Admin Analytics tab is going to show your AP department, expense department, where employees are spending money and what needs to be approved, what's outstanding, what's in WIP, the type of areas where the most expenditures are occurring. You can see who are your top merchants, and you can go into particular employee statistics or employee comparisons on expenses. And so this can give you a lot of insight into whether you need to negotiate discounts, if certain employees are spending too much on, let's say, gifts or airfare. It's going to give you more control over your expense process and be able to take and develop useful policies and rules around it. The next tab that I feel is very useful for employees is this personal analytics tab. This is going to give the employee an idea of what they have outstanding, what they need to keep track of. If, let's say, they use a certain credit card and they realize they're not matching up, it's going to show them how much they've spent over time. They can drill down. It's leveraging the out-of-the-box KPIs and Power BI to create these visualizations with the data that's already in D365, but present it to your users in a meaningful way that helps them take better actions. So if they see that they have 3 expenses unsubmitted, they can see how much that actually is costing them. They might then be enthused to take more rapid action in processing those expense reports when they realize how much is outstanding. Because often what occurs is it's just an overlook on, oh, these expenses, they're here, I'll get to them later. And employees don't realize the implication and the liabilities behind having all of those open expenses. Okay, I'm going to dive back into the reports now, and then we're going to make a few reports, and we're going to look at some comparisons and improvements that the system's added. But if you do have more questions about the embedded analytics and the storytelling behind and how you can use them and work through them, we can definitely talk about those questions at the end of the session. There's built-in filters, so you can look at the transactions by dates, drill down onto approval statuses. We've got a lot of flexibility here. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and make a new expense report. It's very simple. I just simply click the new button. I'll title my expense report What I want to highlight here for you is we've got some new fields that have been added. We've got the expenses tab and the receipts tab. What these will do, if you click add all, it's going to take all of your outstanding open expenses that have been yet to be expensed and add them directly to the report for you. So you're not having to go to that screen and click and select each and every one to be added to the report. If you want to keep those to the side because you know they'll be used later and you simply want to move over the receipts you've gotten captured, we can do that as well by clicking the add, and it'll tell you how many in each case you have of those. So I'm going to go ahead and press add all for each of these items. And the next item I have here is project. This has always been an option to add, and we'll talk about how to add things to the header of the expense report a little bit further on in the presentation. But what you see here in terms of project, location, and entity are completely customizable based on the screen information I'll show you in a little bit later. We get essentially a workbench of all the fields we may want to add to our expense report, and we can pick and choose how those are added. Okay, so now that it's added all those expenses to my report, you might be wondering, what's happening here? Why do I see all these red X's? That's because my expenses right now are out of policy. If I want to quickly see what the issue here is, I can say, oh, I need to give a receipt for all of these and they're not matched yet. And also, because it was a rental car, I need to say where I was renting it from so that I can submit the expense and move forward. Having these different stacked and communicative messages make it a lot easier and less frustrating for employees to enter their expenses and understand what the expectations are. So to resolve these, I would simply start working through this. I can go ahead and I can add my receipts. I can go ahead and say select existing. If I need to double check what it was, I can always hover and it'll open and download for me, or if I click on the bottom on the right, it'll give me a preview of what that expense is and what that document is. I'll select it and I'll add it, and then I can move forward. In this case, let's say there was a header value that needed to be added in this case. We could have put that the location of the expense report needed to be filled in. So in that case, I would have to go back to the header to put that information. But you could do that when you make these rules and determine what those should be. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a new expense now. just to kind of show you what an expense when you make it, and if you keep it within rules, what it's going to look like. So I'm going to make an airline expense. I'm going to say flights. It was a last minute flight and I had no choice. It was very expensive and I didn't really research the flights. So it ended up costing me $2,500. And it was, let's say, Delta. As soon as I enter that, and I see the icon for flights as well, I see that it was outside of policy. So I'm going to click it and I can look and see what the message provided by my company is. I need to provide a receipt, of course, because it's over $25. But this time, it's a reminder that the airfare should be less than $1,000 and I should have used Expedia. What you'll find is the difference between these two messages, though. Once I add the receipt, my screen is going to change from red to green for this particular expense because the second policy violation is a soft warning. So we can provide soft warnings and hard warnings to our employees. We can also couple that with a soft warning with an additional action. So we can say, if the airfare is over $1,000, please provide a business justification as to why this amount was spent or why this class of flight was purchased. And then it'll allow the expense report to continue to submit. Again, I simply need to attach my receipt. This time, instead of attaching an existing receipt, I chose a different receipt from my desktop. Go ahead and press close. And you'll see now that I've met my company's policy rules, my error message has transitioned now to a green circle, and this expense no longer has any policy violations, but I still have the warning violation that my expense should not have been over $1,000. And that's where you see the difference between the policies. One moment. Okay, the next piece I want to show you is credit card matching within the application. With the credit card matching, it's very easy to upload with the data management framework into D365, and then these expenses and credit card transactions will show up in each employee's outstanding expenses. So let's go ahead and take a look. First, I'm going to show you an example of where that expense is. So I'm going to go over to my expense module. And I'm going to show you what this credit card transaction is, so you can then see what it is and then how it got applied. I see that Lars has some unattached expenses, and one is a $750 flight and a $15 meal. Phyllis as well has an open meal, but I'm going to focus on Lars today. In addition to managing expenses for employees, we can also send out automatic reminders to employees that they do have outstanding credit card transactions that need to be matched and processed, and have those emails go out as reminders as those continue to sit or build up. If I was importing more transactions, I could have set up a batch job or do it once a month, whatever my process is, and import them. For right now, we're going to skip this piece and we're going to go look at Lars's expense report. So I'm going to go back to my expense workspace. But what I'm going to do instead of working with my expenses, I'm instead going to switch to Lars, since I have been awarded a delegate for Lars to help him get his expenses done. Right now I see his reports just like you did on mine, but I'm going to move to this expenses tab. And what you'll see and what got imported is the $750 charge for the airline flight. And you'll see the credit card payment method. And I'll see that no receipts are attached. This then it's very easy for them to quickly make a new expense report and add it to it. We don't even need to click the expenses because, again, where I showed you before, it's going to add all the outstanding expenses to his report for him. In this case, we'll select a location where this was for and where he was headed. Excellent. Because this flight was under the $1,000 and it was within policy, and we might already have a policy set up that if it's purchased with a company credit card, we don't need to attach an additional receipt. This shows green for us. At this point, Lars could add additional expenses if he has them, but it's unlikely that he does because he's purchasing them all on the company card, and the process to simply add them to report took 2 clicks. He'll then submit. We are going to get an error because I've set something up to use later on in our workflow. And save it for later. And it's gone now to the workflow, and we can see it look into the approvals for each of the managers when we go look at those later. Lars does not have anything to approve though. So that is what I want to show you with the credit card transactions. It's very easy for employees to spend what they need to meet their obligations, go in, select them all, validate them, attach receipts if they need to, and then simply press submit. Okay. To help you understand a little bit better about how these policies are generated, we're going to take a look at those. This is an example of the screen that we were on. I'm so sorry. The policies, and this is what drove it. So I'm going to go into the application and show you what that actually looks like in D365. Okay, I'm going to the setup area just so you can see how the policies can be set up and stacked. I can have any number of policies, and they can be organized by company. They can be inherited from one legal entity to another. They can be based on categories or topics, or they can all fall into one. And it just depends on the types of rules and the rule sets that I need to set up. So for me to make a policy, I would simply just need to go into the policy. This is an existing one that I already made, but we'll just go into that. I'll say which companies I want it to apply to. And then I'll pick which category I want to update. In this case, I can look and see what I had set up for the airline policy. I see that if the transaction is greater than 1,000, I set a rule that says users can go ahead and submit it, but it gives them the warning message, and that's what we saw before. And then I would enter the text for that message. I have a lot of flexibility here, and some of you may already be familiar with this, but I can say the users are allowed to submit, and it's allowed to be approved, but it's going to display the warning message, as in the case of this particular policy. Or I can say the users are not allowed to submit, and no one is allowed to approve it, and it's going to give it an error message. That is what's more of the hard stop. Or the soft stop is where I'm not going to allow them to approve or submit until a justification is entered. Or I can separate it even further, where I will allow the user to submit, but because of the routing and workflow we've got set up, I know it's going to go to almost a gatekeeper who can then look into the reasons behind it and then add the justification if they agree it should be approved. Okay, so that's the driver behind where those policies come from. So then when I set up, once it's set up and I go back into the expense management screen, it makes a lot more sense when I talk about the airline policy. We'll go look at it once more just so you can see and compare. Oops. And I see the red message as I did before. And another way to make this not appear then would be if I had instead gone and I had made this ticket for $900. I'm going to go ahead and we'll see that the second message has now fallen off. So it's going to be completely dynamic and interactive as your employees are entering values in the system. They're not going to have to wait till something's completely filled out and entered to see if they're within policy or if they need an additional receipt or a justification. We're able to communicate that to them much earlier on. Okay, that's how the policies are driven. And we can set up policies across the application for it. So we can do them on receipts, on meals, on categories, on if there's a guest present, and it's all going to be very nicely communicated on the screen for them. The next thing I want to show you is some of the flexibility we have in customizing what the expense form looks like. We've got this new parameter table, and basically it takes us through some of the top areas of an expense report, from the expense report header to expenses to hotel categories, rental cars, and airline categories. And we can then go on each field, as each of these is a possible field that can be on the expense report, and select which fields we want to add. And we can determine, do we want this to be an optional field that's kind of hidden and in the background for the employee, and they can just fill in if they need to add additional information, and it's just not front and center for them. We can make it a recommended field, and that would make it right on the front of the expense line. A required field is going to be something where we're forcing them to fill this data point in. We don't have the option to make every field required in the system. Some will be allowed, some won't be allowed, but we do get some flexibility. And the last option is to not display that particular field. This helps declutter what the expense report looks like. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that screen. Going to navigate now back to expense reports and expense fields visibility. So the first tab I get when I'm working with this is going to be the header. And I can say, I'm going to recommend that employees always populate a purpose when they do an expense report. And based on some other parameter settings, I can determine if those are company-specific purposes, user-generated purposes, or if they must validate against a list already provided by the AP department. I can suggest maybe they enter location or a description. If I'm a project-based organization, I can make project a required or recommended field. If it's a type of expense where I always will bill a customer, I'll make sure to turn that on. What becomes very useful though is when I get down to the line levels, because let's say that for entertainment expenses, I want to show some additional fields such as purpose or location of the entertainment. because I need that for tax reasons, and I need to know that those justifications were met. And so I don't want that field on every type of category that's available out there. I only want it to show when the category of entertainment is selected. And that's where I could then go ahead and make it a recommended field. Again, recommended is going to bring it to the forefront. Optional is going to hide it further back on the expense report, where they can always get to it by pressing edit. And you'll see as it'll make more and more sense, because we will have certain fields for per diem, we'll have certain fields for airline. When we get to the concept of hotels, if we need to know what the check-in date or the checkout date was, we can make those relevant. If we really don't care what the folio number is, we say don't display, or we don't care what name the guest name was under because it's the person submitting the expense. We have a lot of flexibility here. If we want to create rules and policies around business class flights, pricing of flights, carriers and such, we can add those fields here as well. So it gives us a lot of leeway. And once we've decided what we want in one company, we can copy that to other legal entities if it applies, or it can be company specific. Okay, so I'm going to go back in and show you now how I'm going to add a few more of these fields to the report. And then what I want to do is I kind of want to show you what the prior report looked like compared to the new report, and so you can see some of the changes there. From that point, I'm going to go ahead and talk to you a little bit about the changes to workflow that have been added in this release as well. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and add reason as a recommended field, and let's add on airline, we're going to say ticket class is recommended. So I'm going to go back to expense management now, but instead of going to the new expense management workspace that I had just taken you to, I'm going to take you to the other version and the other place we can look at it and do our reports, and you can get an idea of why using the new Reimagined workspace, it makes it a lot easier for your employees. So far the screen looks very similar, but I'm missing some of the cues and the visual indicators of what my status is. At this point, I would have to kind of go into each report or scroll down the amounts to really see what they were, and maybe do a quick pivot to see how many were outstanding and open. I don't have a nice visual indicator of that. When I make a new report, for the purpose of this exercise, I'm going to show you the new configured workflow. You'll see some new buttons here. And that's a select interim approval and set final approver. So if I work at a type of company where I have employees on many different jobs, on many different projects, and it's very fluid, and it doesn't make sense to set those types of things up in the database as a hierarchy or position tree because of just how fluid it is, I can leverage what is called a expense configurable hierarchy or managerial hierarchy, which is going to then let the user select an additional approver for this report. So if they know they're doing something for this department and for that user, they can make sure it gets routed to them. It's still going to follow their normal train as well, but they'll be able to select the first or last step of the workflow. And knowing that that's in place, it saves the manager the burden of having to make sure it was delegated to the right person. We can select any number of interim approvers. In this case, I've already set my default to Jody's. I can then add more, and I can determine the order, if so necessary, of who it's going to route to. And it's just a list of the employee table. I'll press OK. In this case, I don't necessarily need an interim approver. I just really want to update the final approver. And I'm going to stick with Jody, and I would just do that here. And I've already set Jody as my default. So if I know Jody always needs to approve all my expense reports, I can select her as the default and up until the time where that changes, and then I can turn that default off. You'll see already when you look at the screen, it's a lot different. It's not as fluid, and you don't have as many icons. So I can select the purpose. I can go ahead and select my location. All these other fields are going to be entered based on company policy and if they're required. Again, this is my header of my expense report, and you'll see down here, it's just a little bit more boxy when it comes to entering the expense report. You'll select the category, the car rental. Actually, let's switch. Let's go to flights again. $5,000 flight. It's kind of expensive. See, I've entered the flight now, but I don't get any notification at this time that I'm outside of policy. I either have to wait till I save or I submit to know that something's wrong. And now that I've saved, I now get the error, and I get it in this action side under the bell on the side. So you can see when you're working with it, you get a lot of advantages from using the Reimagined. It's just a much easier interface for your users. The one advantage at this moment to using the old form is that the new workflow configurations can be used on the old form. So that's something you'll have to decide, and I'm going to go ahead and change screen. That's going to have to be something that you guys decide what's going to make sense for you. Do you need to use the new flexible workflow approvals, or do you like the interface of the new screen better? I'm expecting the new workflow features to be added to the expense reimagined workspace just at the time it is on the older screen. So if you do want to use the new workspace as well as the workflow, the way you could manage that is you would have your initial default expense report entered with a final approver selected set as the default. Once this is set as the default, you can then go on and continue to use the expense management new reimagined workspace. When you make an expense report, and it's going to pull that field as a default. So let's go ahead and look at this once more. We'll talk about some of the new fields we added. Talked about flights, just a $400 flight this time. And we'll see the new field ticket class for the flight got entered into the details of the expense report. So it was simply just like a click of a button here to choose which fields are going to show up on the expense report. And you can play with it and test it, and it's not something once you do you can't change or move back. It's really just going to depend what information you do need to capture and what you need at the forefront for your employees. Okay, what I would like to do now is, I don't know if this is possible for one of the admins of the group, to go ahead and take off the mutation, and if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to answer those during this time. Okay, or if you have a question, you can just raise your hand or put it in the chat. happy to take any, or if you have questions about the workflow or how to use the policies or the setup of the forms, we can definitely go over those. Well, if there are no questions, thank you for coming today, and do reach out if you have questions on what this new expense management workspace looks like. There's still a lot of changes coming, and we should expect more rollouts in the upcoming months in terms of developments in the OCR technology, more inputs to the workspace as it pertains to the per diems and the flexible workflows. It keeps enhancing. Thank you, guys. And that is all.